All right, joining us now to share insight into whether Volume 5 of the State Capture Report does indeed complete the picture of the crimes against South Africa, Professor Dirk Kotze, UNISA's political scientist and political analyst and activist, Dr. Dale McKinley. Gentlemen, good evening and thank you very much for your time and for joining us tonight here on In Focus. Let's start right there. I mean, there's been a lot of anticipation and expectation of the release of this Part 5, and I think many were saying it will complete a picture. For example, for the Democratic Alliance, this was important in a sense that it would paint a picture of what happened during the Qatar deployment meetings and what the Commission of Inquiry would need to say to that. Others were saying, well, this will give us a picture of the role that the President plays. Certainly, we've been hearing of other players in the state capture years, yet he was also part of the system. We'll hear what role he played. Well, others will tell you they're expecting to hear what happened at state security and crime intelligence in the country. Dr. McKinley, do you get a sense that this Volume 5 is the final piece of the puzzle that was missing?
I don't think it's the final piece, but I certainly think it's one of the pieces. I think we should take Justice Zondo at his word, which is, and I think he's correct to say that the terms of reference of the Commission were very, very extensive. And there are many, many gaps that are there, not simply, as he mentioned, for example, at the local and municipal level, but within all sorts of other ministries that certainly haven't been part of any of the reports outside of the big ones, like Eskom and Transnet and the Treasury and so forth. There are many other sort of, I would say, mid-level, particularly within the party and director generals and bureaucrats that are not swept up in any of this. So, no, it's not the final piece. It gives us more. I think it gives us a fuller picture. It's certainly, I think, I haven't obviously had the chance, and I don't think anyone has to read the final report. But I think what it would point to is that the state capture story goes way beyond this. This is a significant part of it, but it's not the whole picture. And that, I think, is probably something that we are going to have to, I don't think we're going to have another commission, but I think we're going to have to, for example, let's say, for example, with the ANC, we're going to have to look much, much deeper if we really want to have remedial action and clean out things. And as the President says he wants to do, then it's going to have to go a lot deeper than this report and a few individuals whose heads are on the block.
Yeah. This is a fulfillment, the President says, of remedial action of the State of Capture report, which was penned by the previous Public Protector. Interesting that the President would draw that particular comparison, particularly since he is currently at loggerhead with the current Public Protector, Prof. Dirk Kotze, and challenging the remedial actions of this current Public Protector, but while in the same breath saying, well, we're fulfilling the remedial action of the previous Public Protector. Tell us how that plays out in his politics and whether or not it will have any impact, really.
Yes, well, as we know that the Zondo Commission was recommended by the Thuli Madonsela as the former Public Protector. The report, the State of Capture, was more or less her last report right at the end of her term, and it was unfinished business. So she had recommended, in a sense, the continuation of her work in the form of a commission of inquiry, judicial commission, which became the Zondo Commission. And the Zondo Commission took it much, much further than what I think anyone anticipated. So it goes beyond the Public Protector's frame of reference or terms of reference, as well as what I think anyone could anticipate of what they could do. I mean, the fact that it continued for 4 years was completely unpredictable then. And I think for that reason, by where Judge Zondo is today, or where he was when he handed over the final two parts of that report, actually sort of concluded a very comprehensive process, which I think in the past, it may sound a bit sort of overemphasizing it, but it is a type, in my view, another type of a truth commission, specifically on ethical or unethical conduct in South Africa, and as we call it in state capture.
Yeah. What are we then to do, Prof, if we don't want it to be really in the true sense of the word, become another Truth and Reconciliation Commission report? In other words, a report of just a record of widespread corruption, fraud and abuse that took place during those years without actually following up and doing something about it. I mean, we are still talking now about the arrest of those guys who committed apartheid crimes and reparations, and it's still not, taking off as it should. I mean, are we to expect that this one will be another beautiful door stopper that we will talk about maybe 15 years from now and say, we still have not done anything, by the way, with that report?
Well, that is the risk. I mean, we had a number of commissions of inquiry in the past. The one about the Marikana massacre is another example of it, where it didn't come to its fulfillment. So this is going to be a major test about how the government and the state institutions, like the investigative bodies, like the Hawks, as well as the prosecuting authority, how they are going to respond to this. So that component is certainly going to be a test, and there's no guarantee of how successful they will be with that. But there's the other component of both truth commissions, which is very difficult to quantify in terms of prosecutions or in terms of remedial action or so, and that is the public domain, the way in which this commission filled the public domain. And now for these 4 years, most of the time they were broadcast on TV, live TV, about the evidence and the workings of this commission. And it educated our public. It educated them about corruption in general and what is possible, but it also educated us about what is the extent of the state capture, as we call it now. And it conscientized us, and hopefully it will play that role, that it will make it very difficult in future for those who want to perpetrate this to do it actually. And there's definitely a better public consciousness about the dangers of corruption and all these activities associated with state capture than before the Zondo Commission. My point is always, let's say for argument there wasn't a Zondo Commission. Where would we have been today? To what extent, how much would we be informed and aware of what happened in the past decade? And I think that is, for me, the value, in the first instance, of this commission.
Let's take a break. We'll come back and wrap up the conversation. Professor Dirk Kotze and Dr. Dale McKinley staying with us. We're back in a moment. Back on In Focus tonight, part 5 of the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture report handed over to the presidency earlier on today. We give folks some time to go through it. Even the president saying he'll be reading it closely on his flight back to Cape Town, making marks and, of course, looking at those key issues that need to be addressed. He did promise that, I think, 4 months on after this, he will come and table what actions are going to be taken to deal with all those 5 volumes that have been handed over to him. We have Professor Dirk Kotze as well as Dr. Dale McKinley still with us. Dr. Dale, 3 things that maybe one could look at. Certainly, this is what the alliance partners are looking at. One is whether or not this Commission of Inquiry managed to encourage broad patriotism, but 2, whether it managed to dismantle the state capture that was in existence, but number 3, whether it does in any way assist us in fighting the crime of corruption. What's your reflection?
Well, firstly, I don't think that patriotism has anything to do with it. I think that people, it's basic honesty, it's basic ethics. We don't have to have, a nationalism that sort of frames those kinds of principles and values. I think the vast majority of people that live and work in our country are simply sick and tired of not simply what is happening now, but what's been happening for the last 20-something years. And in that sense, the Commission has played a good role in terms of, as Dirk said, in terms of uncovering and allowing people to see some of the picture. But no, it has not dealt with, it cannot deal. We cannot put all of the expectations onto a judicial commission and say, well, if it doesn't deal with the corruption and if things don't turn around, well, then it's failed. That's not the job of the commission. I think what the commission has shone a light on is how deep the rot goes, even though it could have gone deeper. So, for example, if we want to go further back beyond the terms of commission, we can go all the way back to the 1990s and the arms deal corruption, the very first. Literally, as soon as the horse had bolted from the 1994 elections gate. And in that sense, there is a lot that is still there, so it cannot deal with that. What we have, though, is a situation in which the ruling party is a very guilty party in this case. It was at the center of this, different individuals, different factions, but fundamentally that's the question. So what this leaves us with the question, besides the prosecutions and who might end up behind bars and whether or not there'll be a corruption, is whether or not the state can be repurposed, whether or not it can begin to serve the people. And I think the vast majority of people looking at all of these reports will say that there's huge questions as to whether the ruling party has the capability and the willingness to do so. So that opens up the political space and the possibilities for future alternatives much more so. So in that sense, there is beyond the commission and its own terms of reference, there is what it has done. I think it is basically lit a little bit of the fire in terms of what we need in this country, which is real political alternatives, real different kinds of policies, and new kinds of politicians.
Yeah. Prof, our oversight mechanisms at this particular point, one would say certainly were highlighted by this Commission of Inquiry in terms of their weakness and their strengths. Do we have, or have we come to a broader understanding now of how better to use these oversight instruments and how to strengthen them?
Yes, there's a whole section on political oversight and specifically parliamentary oversight. I don't think the systems, the structures or the institutions that we have, that's the problem. It has been the people in those structures, the incumbents, the persons who were there having to do the work. You can't create sort of artificial structures and that they on their own is going to be working perfectly. It is ultimately the people within these institutions that will make the difference. So I think what we are going to see here is that, yes, there are some procedures that the Commission have proposed with respect, for example, to procurement in the public sector. It is already in part 1 that they are talking about that, about the appointment of the members of the board members of the different SOEs, of senior officials in the SOEs. All sorts of proposals or recommendations are made by the Commission. But ultimately, it is to what extent those persons within those positions, are they ethical in their approach? Are they the ones who are going to take it seriously and not see it as simply opportunities for them to enrich themselves? The checks and balances, they do exist. But if the persons in those checks and balances are all sharing the same ideas about how to abuse these institutions, then it's very difficult actually to change the circumstances. So it is, in my view, it's not about the institutional mechanisms. We have actually almost too many of them already. Maybe it's necessary to rather rationalize them and bring them closer to so that they can be better focused. But ultimately, as I said, it's about the human quality.
The ANC in its response off the cuff, I'll read the final paragraph, saying the ANC will support government as it considers the report's findings and recommendations and undertakes the work necessary to restore good governance and decisively tackle all forms of corruption within the state and across society. And they say all nice words, all nice things there that you would expect them to say. But does it necessarily mean that this would be the end of cadre deployment, or we will see cadre deployment in other forms and other iterations? Prof, and I'll give Dr. McKinley as well to weigh in on that.
Yeah, I don't think, that this is sort of the magic wand, that is going to be the catalyst for major changes now. We are in the season of elections of the ANC's provincial executives and provincial leadership, and we still see this infighting that is taking place there. So at the moment, although the Zondo Commission has been in operation for almost 4 years now, since the beginning of the year, we've started to see the results of that in the form of the first 4 parts of reports. I don't see that in itself is making any difference within government or within the ANC. I think what has made a difference is that the political leadership is trying to approach it from a different point of view. The cabinet, it doesn't include to a large extent Zuma's supporters anymore. In the criminal justice system, many of them have been removed from those positions. So ultimately, I think that is what is going to make the difference, and not necessarily the reports of the commission on its own. It can play ultimately a facilitating role, but as I said in the beginning, in my view, it creates more of a new culture in South Africa, public culture, political culture, in which corruption simply should not be acceptable, and that it gives more ammunition to the public to say, now, if they experience that, how to then respond to that.
Professor McKinley, Dr. McKinley, initially one would have thought the president is playing the long game and he will get the report. This will give him at least some kind of authority to go to his party and say those who are mentioned in this report must be held accountable and do some kind of cleanup of his organization. Unfortunately, this finds him at his weakest, himself being faced with a complaint around what happened at his own farm. I mean, will he be able to use this report in any way?
Well, I certainly think he'll try. But clearly the factional battles that are going on within the ANC in the lead up to the Congress, this is going to become a political football on all sides, not just for the president, but for the so-called RET faction and others who are vying for power and position, whether that's at national, provincial, or other local levels. So I think there's another side to this report, which it's going to be used and interpreted and misinterpreted and manipulated in all sorts of ways in order to push particular political agendas. But I wanted to say this, is that what I think the real importance, and I would disagree with Dirk here, I think it fundamentally is we have systemic problems. And it's not just about the individuals. If this report shows us anything, it's that the rot and the structures it wasn't just the repurposing of the state. It was the repurposing of a political party. It was the repurposing of our politics. It was the repurposing of the entire raison d'etre, in other words, of the state itself and the public sector. And that is going to require very systemic kinds of changes. So I would say that if there's going to be, I don't think that this is going to result in the ending of cadre deployment, the ending of corruption, not at all. Because those fundamental things the roots go much, much deeper and require systemic changes that the ruling party, the commission and others have yet to grasp that nettle And if we only concentrate on individuals and a few prosecutions and putting a few new faces on, we're going to, the systemic problems, the way that I do, the metaphor that I've used is South Africa is a house. The paint has changed. We can change rooms. We can build it, make it look a lot nicer. But if the foundations are not looked at, because our foundations go deep and many of them are rotten and they need to be replaced. And I think that is the larger story and the longer story coming out of this commission.
Coming out of this commission, Prof, as we wrap up, would be, of course, the long conversation of whether the 1 billion rands price tag is worth it. And did we get value out of this process that qualifies as spending that amount of money?
Well, from my point of view, yes. What it costs, whether it's $1 billion or 500 million or so, that to some extent becomes very relative. What is the value or the cost that we can afford in order to have something like this, in order to deal with this part of our history? And it's very, very, very difficult to quantify it in terms of money, of what is acceptable or what is unacceptable. I would say, the role that it played from the perspective I presented tonight, it is very important. It is something that, if, for example, as I said, let's imagine there was no Zondo Commission, where would we be today? How much awareness will there be? How much sort of public resistance will there be, except individual sort of anecdotal evidence about these type of things, but not a concerted effort in order to deal with this from whether it's about just corruption or state capture in its very wide definition, broad definition. It doesn't matter. For me, it was the fact that there was an intervention at this point in time in order to say, well, this is simply unacceptable. It's something which has to be turned around so that South Africa as a state, as a country, as a society can move into a different direction, which is more in line with the constitutional dispensation, the value system that we want to have in the public domain, and so forth.
Appreciate your time, gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming on. Professor Dirk Kotze at UNISA, as well as Dr. McKinley there.